Recession. Everybody speculated that we would have a recession by now. Would you like to know why we didn't have a recession? What's actually been going on in the economy? And how about those interest rates? Would you like to know why Jerome Powell didn't cut rates at the last Fed chair meeting? And what is going on with those employment numbers? There's something strange going on with that too. I'm covering it all. You know, economists and financial analyst Edward Dowd, they all predicted that we would have a recession in the last quarter of 2023. But we didn't. The question is why? What staved off the recession? You know that old saying, if it was a snake, it would have bit me? It's something like that. You know, I watched this recent interview with Edward Dowd. If you don't know who he is, he used to work for BlackRock as an analyst. He's a smart guy. I watch a lot of what he says. He started his own firm and basically puts out reports on financial news, economic indicators, does deep dives into our economy to help people predict, big companies predict what's going to be happening in the future and how to invest their money. And what he has to say is quite interesting, but not surprising.
The recession was delayed, and it was primarily delayed by unprecedented illegal immigration and record deficit crisis level spending in 23 and 24 by the Biden administration. That held up a very fragile stock market. It injected new consumers into the economy that were getting subsidies, and it put a floor on rents. And that delayed the recession, but it also added to the deficit, and it was a sugar high that's not sustainable. President Trump was elected on stopping illegal crossings and deportations. So the flow of illegals has stopped. So the floor under the housing market is starting to ebb away. We're seeing in real time, since we put out our report in January, we're 6 months forward and we're issuing other reports focused on real estate, and all our early leading indicators are rolling over. So we're even more confident now in our call than before. And just to understand, this illegal immigration was the elephant in the room. It's an economic elephant in the room. We brought in officially 12 million border crossings. There have been estimates as high as 20 million, maybe even higher. So let's call it 15 million illegals came into the U.S. in a very short period of time. For you to understand what normal net legal migration is, it's 1 million a year. So this was an unprecedented, very well thought out, very well implemented logistical operation. And the government did give direct money, and also they did wash a lot of the money they gave through NGOs that facilitated this illegal mass immigration.
So what he's saying, and it makes sense, that illegal immigration was propping up our economy. He had all these illegal aliens coming in. The government was giving them money that they could spend on rent, on food. Then there's the NGOs. They were getting billions of dollars. They're spending money, placing all the illegal aliens. Everything costs cash, moving them. Then there was the COVID stimulus. That was a lot of money being pumped into the economy. Now that all of that is stopped, all of that cash flow has come to a screeching halt, what do you think is going to happen? And let us not forget why they let 12 million illegal aliens through the door.
So now many would argue by design that mass illegal immigration was facilitated in order to change the voting demographics of the country. But again, that's just speculation. But I get your broader point that the U.S. economy's resilience in 2023 and 2024, largely a mirage, fueled by loose immigration enforcement, to put it mildly, aggressive deficit spending, and record savings from COVID stimulus, which you've touched on before. So now you're saying that housing is the canary in the coal mine, that we're headed for recession.
Now let's talk about housing. It plays a very large role in our economy. And currently right now, the housing market is not going well. And that primarily has to do with extremely high prices. But things could get better if we had lower interest rates. there could be some further movement in the market if we had better rates. But what causes interest rates to fall, really? I don't know. Slower economy? Poor job numbers? Yeah. Over the past 4 years, the job numbers have been very inconsistent in the way that they've been reported. They always come out with a high number and quietly adjust them down. That's what the MO has been for the past 4 years. Until now. This topic came up during this interview, and it's really interesting what Mr. Dowd had to say about the Fed and job numbers. And he clearly thinks politics played a role.
The numbers are only going to get worse on the employment front, in my humble opinion. And if they're now starting to report the true numbers, a lot of people made bad decisions asset allocation-wise in 23 and 24. And Fortune 500 CEOs were making investment decisions based on what they thought was a healthy job market. So this could end up being a ginormous disaster.
Right. And Powell not taking action on interest rate cuts, which, as we know, President Trump has been pushing him to do based on what he said was strengthen the labor market. But I want to touch on...
Let me add something to that. There's a high likelihood that Jerome Powell saw the payroll numbers before they were released in their decisions on Tuesday and Wednesday. So let's assume he did see them. What evidence do we have that he might have seen them? We saw 2 Fed governors vote no for the first time since 1993. So maybe they saw the numbers and were scratching their heads, why aren't we lowering interest rates? So look, this is speculation on my part, but I do think that Jerome Powell at this point is being political.
Now, whether you're on the left or the right, I think we can all agree that politics should never play a role in making big decisions, especially when they affect our economy.
Also, other news, I forgot to mention this to you in the pregame. A Federal Reserve governor just resigned as well, announced it today. Did not give a reason, but she's gone. So there's
was that I believe it was Michelle that was one of the dissenting governors that resigned today?
I don't know, but let's just say there seems to be turmoil at the Fed.
And I find it extremely interesting that one of the Fed governors resigned. Yeah, I think that's very telling. And the fact that there were 2 Fed governors that stated a rate cut should happen, and it didn't, or Powell wouldn't let it happen. And when was the last time that Edward Dowd said that happened? The last time that happened was 1993. Well, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out what's going on right there. You know, there's a lot of speculation about the housing market and, why prices are high. And for a very long time, the National Association of Realtors, well, their economists have continually told us that it's because we have too small of a supply. But that really may not be true.
So, you have this narrative where you've got the NAR's chief economist saying that multiple years of undersupply are driving record home prices. You're saying that that's not in line with your data.
Well, let's look at what price is doing. Price is stagnated, and now it's starting to roll over, and more listings are coming on. So home affordability is the key. And that's why we're not calling for a systemic crisis as this unfolds, because as prices adjust, there'll be more affordability, and there is supply of people who want to buy homes. And so the market should have a boom on the other side. But if Jerome Powell is right, prices should be continuing to rise. That's assuming that consumers have income and affordability, which they don't. And like I said, the non-farm payroll number has been abysmal. The real non-farm payroll number has been abysmal for the better part of a year and a half. So there's a disconnect. And the disconnect is, sure, there may be an undersupply of housing for those willing to buy, but they can't buy. So price is the only thing that can adjust this. The other thing people need to understand, there isn't just a cost in housing, there's a rising cost in healthcare. So consumers are stretched so thin. Healthcare is going up, auto insurance is going up, and home prices are stagnating. And we think that will lead us into a slow growth, negative GDP economy. And the cycle needs a cleansing, and this will be good. This is not a bad thing.
So again, it all comes back to pricing. Pricing is too high. Builders have built a lot of homes. Now, building starts have slowed. There's a lot of new construction inventory. So there's plenty of houses. We just have houses that nobody can afford. And when the housing market doesn't do well, there is a large trickle-down effect. It affects everything from home decor stores, home improvement stores, commodities like lumber, concrete. All of those things start to slow down when less homes are being built and less homes are being sold.
Well, so here's the math. 20% of US GDP is housing-related services. That is a big part of our economy. If that slows and goes into negative growth, which we suspect it will, it'll have knock-on effects in the rest of the economy. So housing is really it. And that is going to cause feedback loops across all sorts of industries. Additionally, as the bond market starts to figure out that US GDP is slowing, bond yields will go lower, and asset allocators will start to sell equities and buy bonds in anticipation of the Fed lowering interest rates. So we also unfortunately have a record stock bubble. We haven't seen these valuations since the dot-com. And if you look at 10-year forward returns on equities at these valuations, they are zero. Meaning, if you buy today the stock market, the S&P 500, and you hold it for 10 years, including dividends, you're likely going to get back to break even in 10 years. That implies a big drawdown between now and then. And so, unfortunately, the Trump administration is going to face a housing recession and likely a stock market bubble bursting. So he's going to have a dot-com recession and a 2008 housing problem. But we don't think it goes systemic. I know it sounds super scary, but the Fed has more tools in their toolbox than they used to. And as I said earlier, the good news is the millennials are willing to buy once prices adjust. I think we can avoid a systemic issue, but if one starts to appear, we'll call it in real time, and then we have real problems.
So the general consensus is, yeah, we're going to have a housing correction. Probably within the next, 3 to 12 months. But it's not a crash, it's a correction, and it takes time. But the housing market isn't the only thing that's ripe for a correction. The stock market is seriously overpriced, and that, my friends, will happen much quicker.
Okay, how big of a market pullback do you see here? Let's start with that. When you say
given
we're
these
dot-com bubble,
yeah.
like what?
Yeah, given these valuations, the dot-com bubble, we had a 50% pullback over a 2-year period. And during the great financial crisis, we had a 50% pullback. That was driven by an over-levered system, so there was a giant margin call. So I suspect we can just run-of-the-mill 40 to 50% pullback, and it's not the end of the world. And it's great, because if you have money on the sidelines, you can invest at really good prices. And that's what Warren Buffett's been doing for 2 years. I think he also thought a recession was coming in 23, 24, because he's been on the sidelines for the better part of 2 years, accumulating more and more cash. He owns 5.5% of the T-bill market. Berkshire Hathaway owns 5.5%. I just want to reiterate that, 5.5% of the T-bill market. So he's waiting for a nice correction and to scoop up bargains like he did during the great financial crisis.
You know what they say? Never let a good crisis go to waste. You can bet your bottom dollar our government won't. Currently, right now, the American dollar is being devalued. And that's concerning. And that is inflationary. And behind the scenes, there's a lot of moving parts. You can read between the lines. They just passed the Genius Act. And it may just be the Trojan horse that ushers in CBDC.
Nothing goes down in a straight line. It'll take a while before things really get wild, but we're predicting September, October, November, it's going to get very interesting. We expect volatility to kick back in. It's been a very low volatile summer, as measured by the VIX index, the volatility index, and as volatility rises, asset prices tend to have issues. So we think that's going to start manifesting very soon.
All right, so let's bring it back to the CBDC then, right? Central bank digital currencies, which will be easier to usher in when we've got an economy in distress and banking sector consolidation. Now, as a reminder to our viewers, you touched on this as well, but essentially they are government-issued digital dollars, programmable, traceable, centrally controlled, and that's the real concern. The real concern there is control, because they could let the government track your spending, every single transaction, limit how or where you use your money, what transactions you're allowed to make or not make, as you said, potentially allow your currency to expire if not used within a certain amount of time. And then, of course, there's the concern that it gets linked to a social credit score and digital IDs, and then we're dealing with ultimate control, Orwellian style.
Suddenly, the world I used to know was...
So what say you? Do you think stablecoin is going to be used like some programmable digital currency. Whether it's used as a programmable digital currency in a retail capacity or not, I do believe that the government will use stablecoin for some nefarious purposes. You can count on it. You know, there's a lot changing in the world, and I try not to dwell on it. It makes my head spin, and I know I can't control any of it. So, again, I try not to dwell on it too much. But I do think there are going to be some big changes coming. And there's probably going to be some type of stock market correction that will be more painful than a housing market correction. Clearly, Warren Buffett thinks that we have a correction coming. He started stockpiling cash, selling off his stocks as early as 2023. And, you know, all things indicated that we were going to have some type of economic crisis during that time with all of the illegals coming in. It didn't happen, but it's only a matter of time. So, the question is, do you own any gold? Will the Fed start backing all their treasuries with gold? That's the rumor, that the government's going to require treasuries to be backed by gold in order to entice other countries to buy them. So, now might be the time to start holding some physical gold. I am packed a bunch today in this video, right? So what do you think? Put your comments below. Tell me what you think about all of this. I love hearing from you. And of course, I'd love to see you hit the subscribe button if you haven't already done so. Hit the like button to tell the YouTube algorithm to share this video. I would greatly appreciate it. And it's free. And come back and see me again. Take care.